So we're going to continue with inverses, which means you switch the x and the y, and then you solve for y. Okay? So we're going to continue with linear functions, but then know that we're going to be getting into quadratics, and we're going to be getting into rationals and cube root functions. Okay? So first thing I do is I switch my x and my y. Sometimes it becomes easier when I write y equals. So x equals 5/3 y minus 6. There's a couple different ways to do this. One way is get rid of the fraction first. Some people would rather wait to get rid of the fraction. Whatever. Then multiply. You can either multiply by the reciprocal, multiply by 3, and then divide by 5. That might be easier. Distribute, distribute. And then divide by 5. And then now, remember, I've got to divide it to 1. I've got to divide it to both. So y equals 3/5 x plus 18/5. I can't simplify that, so I'm good. But of course, you can't write it as y equals. So it's f inverse x equals 3/5 x plus 18/5. Okay? Now, your homework will be the right one. So the left is notes and the right is homework. All right, same game. This is y. Switch it. So in this case, because the whole thing is being divided by 9, I actually have to multiply by 9 first. Where here, I was only dividing by 3 with the 5 and the y, not the 6, so that's why I moved the 6 first. Multiply both sides by 9. Remember, the goal of that is to get rid of it. Now I need to solve for y. I feel like this one was a bit easier. Don't put those together. Y equals 9x minus 6. You don't need to show this step. If you know to go straight to f inverse, I encourage you to do that. But some people, it just feels better to go, okay, when it says y equals, I know I'm good to go, then I change it. So, of course, your homework is to do this one. Okay? All right, now let's get into quadratics. All right, first thing you do, switch the x and the y. X equals 1/4 parentheses, y plus 3 squared. Now, since this whole thing is being squared, how do I get rid of a squared? I take the inverse, which is square root, inverse operation. Anytime you square root, don't forget the plus or minus. Now remember what the goal is. The goal is to get y by itself, which means that's got to stay and those two things move. I'm going to move the 3 now. I can't put that with that, so I rewrite it as -3 plus or minus rad x equals 1/4 y. The way you get rid of a fraction is multiply whatever the denominator is. Distribute, distribute. Y equals -12 plus or minus 4 rad x. Notice how I put the plus or minus in the middle. And if I wrote this first, let me erase this, and then put -12, I bet you could agree it just doesn't look as nice. It's kind of confusing. So it's better to do it where you put the -12 in front. Okay. Then change it to inverse. Equals -12 plus or minus 4 rad x. I did that one. Your homework is that one. Let's turn the page. This time, instead of having a squared function, I have a square root function. Game's the same. Switch the x and the y. Now, if you'll notice, the y is with the 5, but the 2 is on the outside. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 2 to both sides. Now, I have to get rid of the radical. The way to get rid of the radical is do the inverse, which is squared. I'm going to need to box this out over here. Box it out. I get x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals y plus 5. Almost done. Subtract 5. And I end up with y equals x squared plus 4x minus 1. But remember, it's f inverse. Now, I just want to point out something really quick. On all of these, you're noticing they all say f inverse. But if this said g of x, then it would have to be g inverse x. Be careful of that on the test, because I feel like for this worksheet, I had them all f of x, but I feel like on my test, I would mix it up and go h of x, g of x. So be aware. All right, so switch the x and the y. Now, if the way we got rid of a square root was to square, the way we get rid of a cube root is to cube. So I'm left with x cubed equals y plus 1. Subtract 1. Y equals x cubed minus 1. We're not factoring. I know it reminds you of the difference of cubes, but we're not factoring. We're just finding the inverse. We're not graphing it. We're not finding the zeros. We're just finding the inverse. There isn't a homework problem based on that, so lucky you. Now this is the last one. It's the most difficult. This will be the homework. Okay. First thing I do is switch the x and the y. Oops. Now, I want to get the y by itself, but the problem is there are two y's. So I need to make those two y's one y. And some of you think, I know, go like this. 1 minus 1 over y equals x. And you can definitely do that. That's one way to go, okay? Because y over y is 1, and 1 over y is y. So I'll show both ways, okay? So let me show this way, and then I'll show another way. My mind goes somewhere else because I don't like the idea of having a fraction. But I can do that. Subtract 1, subtract 1. X minus 1 equals negative 1 over y. Oops, sorry. Went a little crazy here. Multiply both sides. I'm going to multiply both sides by negative y so that the one, or I'll just multiply by y. That's probably easier for your brain. Okay. And then I'm left with y, x minus 1 equals negative 1. Then don't distribute the y, because then you'll be back with having two y's, and the whole reason why you did this was just to get one y. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to divide both sides by x minus 1. And then I'd be left with y equals negative 1 over x minus 1. F inverse of x equals negative 1 over x minus 1. I'd like to show you a different way because my brain has it go a different way. But I just thought of that way just now, so I want to show you more than one way. So let's say I had this. So y equals x minus 1 over x. Switch the x and the y like before. So in the other one, I divided and divided. This time what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by y. Because my brain doesn't like fractions. And so that's kind of where I go right now. Then I would subtract y to both sides. These are different because that has an x and a y and that just has a y. Then they both have a y, so I factor it out. And then I divide by x minus 1, which is what I had before. And I'm left with y equals negative 1 over x minus 1, which is what I had here, okay? I want to show you this way because I feel like when you get to higher level math, it's a lot of moving things over to factor them. As I've told you 5 million times, factoring is huge. Whatever way, this way, great. This way, great. You know your homework?